When she leaves her native Egypt to start a new life in the United States, 18-year-old Omaima Aref is filled with dreams to fulfill. Thrown into a consumer-driven society, freed from traditional constraints, she wants to enjoy life and uses her beauty as an asset to get what she desires. When she crosses paths with William Nelson, a wealthy man much older than her, it's love at first sight. But things won't go as planned. In today's podcast, join me as we dive into the Omaima Nelson case, a story that made headlines in the U.S. in the 90s and continues to spark discussion. Warning: some parts may be disturbing for listeners. Recommended for a mature audience. Omaima Aref was born in Cairo, Egypt in 1968. She grew up in an environment shaped by rigid traditions and a certain austerity. Her parents, illiterate and deeply conservative peasants, had 15 other children. Raised under strict principles, Omaima was taught that women must submit to male authority. At the age of 6, she underwent female circumcision, a widespread practice in Egypt and other African countries with Muslim cultural influence at the time. This form of genital mutilation was intended to suppress sexual desire and preserve a girl's chastity until marriage. Particularly brutal and painful, the procedure was often performed without anesthesia and in poor hygienic conditions by women who had learned the practice informally. As a result, many young girls died from severe bleeding. Those who survived, like Omaima, remained traumatized for life. Little is known about Omaima's early years in Egypt, but her childhood was marked by economic hardship and family tensions. From a young age, she faced gender inequalities and the weight of tradition. Seeing her brothers receive privileges denied to her sisters stirred feelings of anger and deep-seated injustice within her. The Aref family lived in the Karafa district, within Cairo's vast necropolis. In the early 1970s, Karafa was divided into two sections, the northern and southern cemeteries. The Aref family resided in the northern section, in a small Spartan dwelling where 9 of the 16 children, along with their parents, slept directly on the floor. The older siblings, already married, had long since left home. As a teenager, Omaima began rebelling against her parents' authority. Escaping this environment became a matter of survival for her. She dreamed of a different life, far from the restrictions imposed by her family and Egyptian society. Her beauty drew the attention of men, giving her a certain influence, though she remained under her father's control. He frequently beat her with his belt to enforce his rules. Several accounts suggest that, despite her young age, Omaima was already aware of the power she could wield over men. One day, during an argument with her father, she dared to say, "Why should I obey blindly? I want to be free and choose my own life." Her father, furious, responded, "A woman who defies tradition ends up alone and lost. You'd better conform, or you'll regret it." At 18, Omaima finally got the chance to change her life, thanks to a man named Roger Stainbrook. Stainbrook, a 47-year-old American citizen and divorcee, met the young woman while on a leisure trip to Egypt. The attraction was immediate, and even though she spoke little English, she managed to make him fall in love with her. She felt nothing for him, but she knew he was her way out, her golden ticket, her one chance to escape poverty. In 1986, after months of administrative paperwork to secure a spouse visa, Omaima Aref boarded a plane for the first time in her life and landed in Los Angeles, where her husband awaited her. The vastness of the country, the wealth of the streets, the cafe terraces, the endless luxury boutiques, the towering palm trees, and the blonde women in skimpy outfits strolling confidently, it all hit her like a shockwave. It was exactly as she had imagined it, maybe even better. The young woman, with her exotic beauty and melodic Arabic accent, was filled with dreams and a burning desire to transform her life, to rise to the top of a society where everything seemed possible. The couple settled in Southern California. After an idyllic honeymoon phase, the first tensions emerged, followed by conflicts. The main reason was the stark cultural differences between them, but even more so, Omaima's habit of flirting with nearly every man she met, sometimes clumsily, which made her husband intensely jealous. As expected, the marriage didn't last, and they eventually divorced. Now free, the young Egyptian resumed her life, though she soon felt the impact of losing her ex-husband's financial support. She had to fend for herself and find a job to survive. This was the other side of living in a wealthy country. People didn't help each other or stand together like in Egypt. Here, knocking on a neighbor's door to ask for a little oil, tea, or sugar was unthinkable. At first, Omaima worked as a nanny while taking language classes on the side. But this life, too routine, too tame, quickly bored her. What Omaima truly wanted was an exciting life, a luxurious villa with a pool in Beverly Hills, supported by a husband who would lavish her with everything she desired without hesitation. At 19, she was vibrant, seductive, daring, and deliberately provocative. She drew attention wherever she went and left no one indifferent. It wasn't long before she landed a job as a lingerie model at the South Coast Plaza shopping mall. Though her earnings improved, her love for luxury and material things became even more apparent. The young men working at the mall with their modest salaries didn't interest her, even though many pursued her and hoped for something serious. But Omaima remained unmoved after all. What was love without money and comfort? Alongside her modeling job, she became a regular in Los Angeles' trendiest bars. The Huntington Club, with its wealthy, older male clientele, quickly became her favorite spot. She soon realized that her charm could open doors and provide her with a comfortable life. Yet she also had a highly pragmatic view of relationships. She was willing to manipulate her partners to get what she wanted. Going by the aliases Nadia or Ishta, Omaima was always on the lookout for her golden ticket. She juggled multiple relationships at once, keeping several wealthy men wrapped around her finger. Her rich lovers, whether for a week or a month, showered her with gifts, took her on private jet trips, and covered her expenses. But her behavior was starting to raise red flags. Excessively charming when she sets her sights on someone, she can change her behavior in the blink of an eye. When upset, she becomes violent, vulgar, irate, and unable to control herself. Her first lover, a certain Robert Hansen, 61, accused her of pointing her revolver at him during a consensual bandaging session. However, no charges were filed with the sheriff's department. Omaima defended herself, claiming that it was all part of a sexual game. After obtaining her driver's license in 1989, she accumulated traffic violations and was arrested several times for speeding and driving under the influence. Yet she remains unable to break free from her habit of preying on men, though not before managing to marry one of her wealthy lovers. Up to that point, none of them had proposed to her. It must be said that for these men mostly already married, and Father's Omaima Stainbrook is just one luxurious escort girl among many, a sort of tempting object that initially piques curiosity but eventually becomes tiresome after one has sampled her. Above all, it is her sudden mood swings and aggression that drive her conquests away, as they are frightened by her bipolar and problematic behavior. Excessively charming when she sets her sights on someone, she can change her behavior in the blink of an eye. When upset, she becomes violent, vulgar, irate, and unable to control herself. Her first lover, a certain Robert Hansen, 61, accused her of pointing her revolver at him during a consensual bandaging session. However, no charges were filed with the sheriff's department. Omaima defended herself, claiming that it was all part of a sexual game. After obtaining her driver's license in 1989, she accumulated traffic violations and was arrested several times for speeding and driving under the influence. Yet she remains unable to break free from her habit of preying on men, though not before managing to marry one of her wealthy lovers. Up to that point, none of them had proposed to her. It must be said that for these men mostly already married, and Father's Omaima Stainbrook is just one luxurious escort girl among many, a sort of tempting object that initially piques curiosity but eventually becomes tiresome after one has sampled her. Above all, it is her sudden mood swings and aggression that drive her conquests away, as they are frightened by her bipolar and problematic behavior. Then came a night in October 1991. As she played a game of pool at the Huntington Club, she felt an intense gaze on her. Just behind her, leaning against the bar and slowly sipping a Malibu cocktail, was a rough-looking old cowboy. He spoke loudly and snapped his fingers to get the bartender's attention. Omaima, known to everyone here as Nadia, knew she was being watched. She exaggerated the sway of her hips and struck sensual poses. "Your turn, Nadia. Let's see what you've got." She laughed just loud enough for the man at the bar to hear. At that moment, a server placed a cosmopolitan on the pool table in front of her. "From the gentleman over there." The Egyptian woman feigned indifference, not even glancing at the drink. She continued her game as if nothing had happened, wanting to see how far he would go. It was 10 p.m., and the VIP club was starting to fill up. Wealthy older men arrived, arm in arm with their barely 20 or 25-year-old girlfriends. For these regulars, tables were often reserved by default, no need for bookings. The women accompanying them, dressed in skimpy outfits with heavy makeup, started swaying their hips, lighting cigarettes, and tossing their heads back as they exhaled smoke. Then they began calling over the servers, ordering bottles of champagne, caviar, royal shrimp, salmon en croûte, oysters from the San Francisco Bay, and platters of fine French cheeses. In short, all the things they never got to indulge in before. They joked, flashing wide smiles, laughing in that exaggerated, practiced way they had perfected over time. Once served, they picked up morsels of food delicately, placing them teasingly between the dentures of their sugar daddies, who played along willingly, knowing full well that money could buy anything. For these women, every day was a ruthless battle to hold on to their benefactor. One lingering glance at a younger, prettier girl, and it could all be over in an instant. Between them, the women sized each other up, scrutinizing one another without so much as a greeting or a smile. They were well aware of their rivalry, each fiercely guarding her territory, her table, and her wealthy old patron. Omaima knew this ruthless, cutthroat world of nightlife women all too well. She had learned to navigate it with a disarming ease. Unlike the Californian blondes who all seemed to have the same look, she knew her exotic appeal set her apart. Most of the clientele assumed she was Mexican or of mixed African-American descent, but when they heard her speak, they realized she came from somewhere even more tropical. In fact, she had even started exaggerating her Egyptian accent despite now speaking decent English. "I've been watching you for a while, and I must say, you've got a great stroke." Omaima turned around, feigning surprise, offering a coy little smile. The man from the bar had finally given in and approached her. Holding a glass of whiskey, he raised it for a toast. He quickly introduced himself. "My name's William Nelson, but please, call me Bill." One thing was certain. When he had walked into this bar that evening, he hadn't expected to meet anyone, let alone someone like her. But if there was one thing he had learned from his time in the U.S. Marine Corps, it was to never let a golden opportunity slip through your fingers. Bill Nelson was instantly captivated by Omaima's exotic beauty, her dark, mysterious eyes, and the magnetic presence that set her apart from every other woman in the club that night. Bill, 56 years old, is from Texas. He drives a red Corvette, wears bright red cowboy boots, a brown leather jacket, and a large gold belt buckle. He's the perfect prototype of the newly rich American farmer who enjoys flaunting his wealth without shame and has no qualms about his appearance. His friends describe him as larger than life. A notorious ladies' man, accustomed to traveling and different cultures, he is immediately drawn to this enigmatic young woman with brown skin, a slim waist, and hair permed like Tina Turner's. They talk all evening. Bill wants to know everything about her. "Are you new in town?" he asks with a confident smile. "Yes, I'm Egyptian. I've been living in California for a few years," she replies, playing up her foreign accent to capture his attention. Looking at her, he could believe it. Omaima has atypical Arab features. Women from this region are known for their striking beauty and feline, passionate nature. I'm divorced and a father of 5. I work as a private pilot for a company called Cannon Mortgage, Incorporated. I also do some programming in my spare time. The conversation at the bar that evening turns into a whirlwind romance. But before they go too far, Bill admits to Omaima that he had just gotten out of prison not long ago. The reason is that for years he had been smuggling drugs and electronics into Mexico from an airport in Texas. He was arrested and spent 4 years in prison. Omaima, who carries a turbulent and scandalous past, doesn't mind at all. It's true that he has no manners, drinks like a fish, and smokes a pack of cigarettes in the blink of an eye. But he has everything she's looking for in an alpha male: success, generosity, and attentiveness. To impress her, he tells her about his career as a pilot and his adventures around the world, while she describes her childhood in Egypt, her large and impoverished family, the misogyny of Egyptian men she couldn't tolerate, and her desire for freedom that led her to the United States. They spend their first night together. The next day, Bill invites her to dinner at a more casual restaurant he frequents. Over the weekend, he takes her shopping in Santa Monica and dancing at a nightclub. Their relationship progresses quickly. Nelson showers his mistress with luxurious gifts and takes her to fancy restaurants. During a romantic dinner, he takes her hand and says, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Omaima, touched by his attention but aware of the opportunity it presents, smiles at him and softly replies, "You're a good man, William. Maybe destiny brought us together." Just 5 weeks after meeting at that evening at the Huntington Club, the couple decides to travel to Phoenix, Arizona to get married. The wedding ceremony takes place in a mix of enthusiasm and haste, with no guests or witnesses, in a small, kitschy chapel where the pastor is dressed as Elvis Presley. Then the couple flies to Hawaii for their honeymoon. Upon returning, they settle into the husband's beautiful villa in Costa Mesa in Southern California. Omaima, now Mrs. Nelson, is on cloud 9. She has finally fulfilled her dearest wish, to marry a wealthy man who can offer her the princess life she had always dreamed of. Bill, for his part, spares no expense for her. Nothing is ever too good for his young and sexy wife. Omaima, on her side, plays the role of the tender and loving wife, though at times some of her behaviors reveal a more calculating and darker side of her character. However, the large age and cultural difference begin to create tensions in the marriage. Bill, used to being in control, quickly becomes controlling and possessive. Meanwhile, Omaima, who has always sought independence, refuses to fully submit to him. The first months of their union are marked by arguments and misunderstandings. "You should be grateful. I'm giving you a dream life," Bill snaps at her during yet another argument. Omaima, furious, retorts, "I'm not an object to be owned. I want to be treated with respect." But things don't improve. Bill becomes increasingly authoritarian, possessive, and sometimes aggressive towards his wife, while Omaima remains just as rebellious. She is proud and refuses to submit to her husband's control. As expected, their relationship becomes toxic and explosive, marked by increasingly intense confrontations. They, who once couldn't spend even a day apart, now begin to avoid each other. Bill often abandons their marital home, coming back late, finding his wife already asleep. Omaima, on her side, starts to get bored in the large house, with its heavy, outdated decor, where hunting trophies coexist with bearskins and aviation merit medals. Once, while trying to make changes to a room, her husband entered such a rage that he grabbed a vase and threw it against the wall. "This is my house, and I decide the decor." Another source of conflict arises when she discovers that Bill lied to her about his ex. Although he told Omaima that his first wife filed for divorce while he was in prison, the process was never finalized. As a result, technically, he is still married to her. This is enough to spark a war at home. Omaima, jealous and fearing she would be deprived of her rights in case of her husband's death, pressures him to put the villa in her name and take out a life insurance policy with her as the beneficiary. Bill stubbornly refuses, calling her a gold digger and a slut. "If I put the house in your name, what will be left for my children?" That day, Omaima realizes she is just an option, while she had believed she was a priority in Bill's life. Fearing that she might lose the jewelry, furs, and designer bags he had given her, she takes everything and places it in a safe deposit box at the bank. The shadow of divorce begins to loom over this couple, who fell in love at record speed and married after just a month of dating. Convinced that her husband is seeing another woman, Omaima decides to do the same. This leads her to meet a certain Jose Esquivel, a Mexican plumber who had previously come to repair something in the villa. With her powerful sex appeal, the young woman has no trouble seducing this simple man, an immigrant like her, who quickly succumbs to her charms. They become lovers, following the cliché of the abandoned rich woman who ends up falling for her chauffeur or gardener. On his side, Bill suspects nothing of his wife's double life. Deep down, he doesn't really care. The initial attraction has given way to complete indifference. He has also begun to show extreme violence towards her, even going so far as to hit her and sexually assault her when she refuses him. The accumulated tension finally explodes. Thanksgiving, November 28, 1991. Jose Esquivel is sitting at his meal watching television. It's a warm and mild late November evening in California, without the cold and snow typical of the holiday season. On Channel 7, there's a rerun of the movie Rocky. Jose chews on his meal, finds it a bit bland, and goes to get some hot sauce from the fridge before returning to his sofa. Knock! 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 He jumps. The knocking becomes more frantic. Who could be at the door at this hour? He stands up and walks to the door to see who it is. On the threshold, he finds Omaima, crying. Wearing a black trench coat over her nightgown, she's shivering and her face is pale. "I need your help, Jose," she murmurs, glancing around nervously. Jose, intrigued, asks, "But what's going on, Omaima?" "You look upset." She takes a deep breath before speaking in a broken voice. I've had a problem with my husband. He's gone. I need to get rid of something. Can you help me?" Jose immediately senses that something is wrong. He notices dark stains on her clothes and her terrified, evasive gaze. He tries to find out more. "Where's William?" "What do you mean by gone?" Mrs. Nelson avoids the question and tries to soften him, brushing his arm. "You know, I can reward you. You and we get along so well," she says with a forced smile. Jose, now worried, pulls back. "No, tell me everything right now. What did you do?" Realizing he isn't taking the bait, she tries to downplay the situation. "Why are you getting angry like this, darling? It's nothing, just a few things to get rid of. Let me in, and we'll talk about it, okay?" She takes his hand and snuggles against him. Jose, almost on autopilot, leads her to the living room where Rocky is on TV, with the boxer in the middle of a fight. He goes to get her a glass of water, offering Coca-Cola and tequila, but she declines. After a few minutes, Omaima has calmed down enough to tell him everything. But as she explains how all of this happened, Jose's mood shifts from concern to terror. He struggles to believe what she's saying. "If you don't believe me, Jose, come with me to the car." Outside, he sees William Nelson's red Corvette Stingray parked downhill, a car he knows well from having washed it once. Looking through the window, he spots a plastic garbage bag. Omaima opens the door with a mechanical gesture and signals him to open the bag. Inside, there are packages wrapped in newspaper. Some of them are stained with red blood. "Help me make Bill's remains disappear. I don't want anyone to know. I beg you, Jose. I'll inherit the house and all his fortune, not to mention the life insurance, and we'll marry you and me, have children, and..." Omaima's voice suddenly seems inaudible to her lover. He's so shocked by what he sees that he's unable to make the connection with what she's saying. "Jose, you're the only person I have left. I don't want to go to prison, you understand. It was an accident. He raped me. He tied me up like an animal. He wanted to finish me off with his shotgun. It was self-defense. I'm not a murderer. You believe me, don't you?" The young Mexican straightened up and involuntarily stepped back from the car. He glances at his mistress, who is still pleading with him, almost on her knees, tear-streaked and disheveled, deprived of her beauty. She now looks like a little girl who has just made a big mistake and is afraid of being punished by her parents. "I'm sorry, Omaima, but I really can't help you," and he quickly goes back inside and locks the door, fearing she's armed and will come after him too. He stands behind the door for a moment, breathless and sweaty. The car hasn't started yet. What's she up to? After 10 minutes or so, he finally hears the engine roar and the car pull out of the driveway. Jose breathes a sigh of relief. He still can't believe all this. What he's just seen and heard is completely beyond him. He starts pacing up and down his living room. What should he do now? If he says nothing, he'll be considered an accomplice, and he doesn't want that. Not only would he be tried and thrown in jail, but he might even be extradited to Mexico. So, after an hour's thought, he picks up the phone. "Hello, 911? I'm calling to report a crime." But what really happened that night at the Nelsons' house? Let's go back a few hours. A few days before Thanksgiving, Bill's attitude took a turn for the worse. The romance between him and Omaima was coming to an end. Not only does he avoid her, he's happy when she's not around. Whenever they're in the same room, it's a dispute for whatever reason. Often inebriated, Bill now takes out all his anger on his wife, beating her violently and forcing her, at times, to comply with his sexual demands. To try and calm him down, Omaima decides to organize a one-to-one Thanksgiving dinner, a sort of attempt at reconciliation. She spends all day on December 2nd behind the stove, preparing turkey, stuffing, desserts, and even a traditional Egyptian dish. At the end of the day, she goes to the supermarket for wine and dessert, before returning home to finalize the last preparations before Bill's arrival. With her meal finally ready, she went upstairs to get ready, dressing very sexy and putting on a lot of makeup. Bill arrived, obviously very tipsy. His crooked hat, his gait, and his disheveled air prove that he stopped off at the bar before coming. He barely glances at her. When he sees the table set as if for a wedding, he says mockingly, "Are you trying to pull the wool over my eyes? Did you put poison in the turkey? Do you really think you can get rid of me that easily?" Omaima tries dialogue, charm, and gentleness, but Bill remains impervious to her attempts at seduction. "You're disgusting. You're pitiful. Look at yourself in the mirror, looking like you're going out to hit the streets." Mortified by this last remark, she starts cursing him in English and Arabic, then scratching his face and neck. But Bill, physically stronger, took off his belt and began to hit her, banging her head against the wall. Omaima made several unsuccessful attempts to escape his blows. Pushing her in front of him, he dragged her upstairs to their bedroom. He pushes her ruthlessly onto the bed and leaves the room, locking the door. Omaima starts banging on it, calling for help, begging him to open the door. She grabs the phone and tries to dial 911, but she sees the door latch turn and Bill appear, a rope in his hand. "Who are you calling? Are you calling the police? So you want to turn me in?" "Oh, but I can say more about you. You think I haven't figured out what you're up to with that Mexican?" Things eventually get out of hand. Bill pulls out a large kitchen knife and points the sharp blade at his wife's cheek, signaling that he will sweep her off her feet at the slightest movement. Using the rope, he ties her hands and ankles to the bed before sexually assaulting her, again at knife point. During the assault, Omaima managed to free one of her hands. Grabbing a lamp, she hurled it at William, smashing it over his head. He falls to the ground, unconscious. A trickle of blood begins to run down his temple. Not letting him out of her sight, the young woman, trembling and half-naked, hurriedly disentangled herself from him and got off the bed. From that moment on, she enters a kind of second state. Grabbing the knife, Omaima starts stabbing her husband and doesn't stop until he's dead. When she finishes, she stands there for a moment, covered in blood, breathless, contemplating the horrific crime scene. Little by little, she finally realizes that what she's done is very serious. She's killed a man. She's going before the judge. She'll be convicted and sent to prison. No, she doesn't want to spend the rest of her life behind bars. It's out of the question. Omaima told Jose she didn't want that to happen. She had to hide the evidence and was prepared to pay him a large sum of money if he agreed to help her. She dismembered Bill's body so she could hide it more easily. but she simply couldn't get rid of it all herself. She needed Jose to get rid of Bill's head and dentures so that no one could identify the body. That same night, and after being turned down by her lover, she decided to visit an old boyfriend, Richard Gray, to make the same proposal. She offers him $75,000 to help clean up the villa and dispose of the body. Gray, however, flatly refuses to get involved in a murder case and chases her away. Omaima Nelson was arrested a few hours later as she was returning home to gather a few things to leave California. Unbeknownst to her, Jose had called the police to report the crime. At the police station, she quickly confessed, "It was self-defense. He brutalized me, banging my head against the wall. Then he raped me, threatening me with the knife. It wasn't the first time." The rest of her story is unbelievably brutal. Instead of calling the police or seeking help, she set about dismembering her husband. To do this, she used knives, a blender, and other kitchen utensils to cut the body into several pieces. After performing this macabre act, Omaima desperately sought help from those around her, attempting to recruit her lover and ex-boyfriend to help her. Both men, disturbed by her behavior and requests, alert the authorities. When the police arrive, they discover a scene of horror in the house. Investigators are stunned by the level of violence and the way William Nelson's body has been mutilated. Some body parts had been placed in the refrigerator, others burned or placed in garbage bags, boiled and fried in oil in a clumsy attempt to make the evidence disappear. Most surprising of all, how could this diminutive woman commit such carnage all alone and with no one to help her? Witness testimony and police reports reveal that she had tasted her husband's flesh, although this remains controversial. During the trial, this particularly terrifying detail reinforced the horror of the case and aroused a morbid fascination among the public. During questioning, Omaima maintains that she acted in self-defense. "He forced me! I had no choice!" she tearfully pleads to the investigators. She would never define herself as guilty. However, the physical evidence contradicted her version, and the degree of mutilation of the body suggested a much darker intent than simple self-defense. At the end of January 1992, Robert Hansen, another former boyfriend of the accused, came to see the police as part of the investigation. He recounts that one day, following an argument, she tried to strangle him in his sleep with a necktie. Frightened, he asked her what she was doing. Then she laughed, claiming she was joking with him and that it was a sex game. Worried that she was capable of the worst, he decided to end their relationship. Omaima Nelson's trial opened in 1993. Prosecutors presented a calculating, manipulative woman who had premeditated her act. A venal woman, obsessed with money and devoid of any moral compass. They point to the fact that she tried to make the evidence disappear and that she solicited help to cover up her crime. The defense, on the other hand, insists on her difficult past, her vulnerability, and William's alleged violence. During the trial, John Fitzgibbon, a former friend and lawyer of the victim, states that the couple honeymooned in Laredo, Texas, not Hawaii. As for their marriage, which the couple claimed to have celebrated in Las Vegas or Phoenix, it does not appear in either city's matrimonial registry. The brutality of the crime, the dissection of the corpse, the head, then the genitals, and the presence of several remains in the fridge speak volumes about the murderer's true motives. Nelson cooked her husband's hands in oil, boiled his head, and hid it in the freezer. She then used a garbage disposal to get rid of the bones, skin, and other organs. However, the idea that she consumed her husband's flesh has never been proven, although it is possible. The accused, moreover, always maintained that this was absolutely false. After several weeks of debate, the jury returned its verdict. Omaima Nelson was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years imprisonment, which could be extended to life imprisonment. Since then, she has been serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women, a high-security prison. Today, the Omaima Nelson case remains one of the most horrific domestic crimes in U.S. history. Her story shocked public opinion enormously in the 1990s. While some see her as a victim of domestic violence taken to extremes, others are convinced that she is a dangerous sociopath and manipulative predator who exploited her partners for her own gain. Many make the connection between her and the fictional cannibal Hannibal Lecter from the film Silence of the Lambs. In October 2011, Omaima Nelson applied for parole, which was denied. According to psychiatric experts, one of the reasons for this refusal was that she showed no remorse, taking no responsibility for her actions, and continuing to blame her former husband. She would, however, be eligible for parole from 2026.